I was standing in the kitchen of our condo in Kingston, Ontario, sipping the last of a lukewarm green tea when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was just past midnight, the kind of late when everything outside falls quiet, and the only thing moving is your own mind. I expected a quick good night from Melissa. She was supposed to be in Muskoka for a yoga and wellness retreat with her friends. Instead, I got 2 sentences that tore 15 years of marriage straight down the middle. I'm not coming back. I've met someone better. Also, your things are in storage. Attached to the message was a screenshot, an e-transfer of $112,000 moved from our joint account to her personal one. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just a decisive financial and emotional guillotine. I stared at the screen for a long while, letting the silence press in. My name is Graham Ellison. I'm 54 years old, a forensic accountant by trade. And I've made a career out of catching details that others miss. But this wasn't about missed signs. This was about willful blindness. The kind you practice when loving someone becomes more comforting than questioning them. Over the last year, I'd noticed things, of course. New outfits she never wore around me, long weekends that quietly turned into full weeks. Locked phones, interrupted calls, sudden silences. When I walked into the room, I noticed everything. Not because I was suspicious, but because noticing is what I do. Numbers whisper stories to me. Timelines don't lie, patterns always emerge, and still I said nothing. Maybe part of me hoped I was wrong, or maybe I was just tired of being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never questions. Melissa used to joke that I was solid as a spreadsheet. I used to think it was a compliment. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I didn't even pace. I set the mug down, walked to my office, and opened my second laptop, the one Melissa never knew existed. From there, I logged into my secure email, the one I used for contingency planning. There were 3 notifications from the financial alert system I'd built years ago. Melissa had tried to access 2 accounts she wasn't authorized to touch, and had attempted to change a password on an internal crypto ledger tied to one of our international holdings. She was being thorough. I had to give her that. She wasn't just leaving, she was trying to erase the structure we'd built together and rebuild it around someone new, someone who apparently was better. I picked up my phone and typed 2 words in response: good luck. Then I hit dial on my brother's name. Noah answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. You okay? Remember the contingency plan I asked? The one we joked about but built anyway. A pause. Yeah. It's time, I said. She just made her move. Another silence, longer this time, but solid. All right, he said. Let's go to work. I hung up and turned back to the hallway. The only photo left of us in the condo, our wedding picture, hung just outside the bedroom. It had been there for years. I'd stopped looking at it a long time ago. Tonight, it felt like a picture of 2 people I didn't know anymore. I met Melissa at a university alumni dinner in Toronto. She was 34 at the time. Vibrant, spiritual, always full of energy. I had just finalized my divorce from a brief and ill-matched first marriage and wasn't looking for anything serious. But Melissa had that rare way of making every conversation feel like it mattered. We dated for less than a year before getting married. I paid for her yoga studio to open in Kingston and funded its expansion 2 years later. When she asked for a new car, I nodded. When she wanted to take retreats abroad, to expand her practice, I didn't question it. I was raised to believe that providing is how you show love. And I provided well, but I also protected quietly. About 6 years into our marriage, during a particularly tense tax season, when Melissa forgot my birthday entirely, I began restructuring our finances. Nothing shady, just clean, quiet layers of separation. I formed two limited liability companies. One was used to purchase real estate abroad. Another housed a few crypto investments. I'd kept off the main books. I also maintained several accounts under my business license accounts Melissa never knew existed. She had access to our joint account, our day-to-day spending, and a few retirement portfolios, but not the core. When she forgot my birthday again, last December, she bought me a luxury watch the next day and said I've been so overwhelmed with the studio expansion. I smiled, thanked her, and that night finalized the last piece of my personal firewall. I suppose on some level I'd been preparing for this moment for years, not because I didn't trust Melissa, but because I trusted that one day someone might make a choice that would leave me with nothing if I wasn't ready. Now she had made that choice, and I was ready. At 6:04 a.m. the next morning, I was already at my desk. The sun had barely broken the horizon over Lake Ontario, but my screen was lit, cursor blinking patiently. I'd slept maybe 3 hours if you could call it sleep. More like a low-power standby mode brain running constant calculations behind the closed lids. It wasn't grief that kept me up. Not exactly, it was movement processes. My mind, like always, defaulted to action. Melissa had made her move. Now it was my turn. And in my world, response didn't come through yelling or threats. It came through structure, documentation, and clean, traceable lines. I opened the portal to my custom-built financial monitoring system. Years ago, I'd adapted software meant for corporate clients used to track offshore accounts and shell transfers for personal use. It was one of those things I built late at night with no real expectation I'd need it, but today it felt like a lifeboat. I began the protocol Noah and I had designed 6 years ago, shortly after Melissa opened her second studio and insisted on full access to all our shared accounts. She never asked why I hesitated. She just assumed I'd come around. I didn't. I created a system instead. Step 1, freeze joint accounts. I sent a single-line instruction to the banks handling our shared savings mortgage accounts and joint credit cards. By 6:19 a.m., every dollar Melissa had access to was either flagged or on hold, pending identity verification. Step 2, trigger fraud alerts. I flagged the $112,000 transfer she made the night before as suspicious and unauthorized. I attached a timeline of previous microtransactions from the past 14 months, evidence she'd been siphoning off funds in small, traceable increments. Then I sent a packet to Ava Choi, my attorney in Toronto, with a note: initiate divorce proceedings, include financial misconduct, and request emergency asset protection order. By 7:03, Ava had replied. Understood, I'll get it into court by end of day. No questions, no soft tones, just precision. That's why I hired her. I logged off the system briefly to refill my tea and noticed my phone buzzing on the countertop. Melissa, I let it ring, then again and again. 8 calls in under 15 minutes, then came the texts. What's going on? My card just got declined. Followed by, the transfer is missing. Where's the money? And finally, you need to call me now. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the second alert file. Melissa had tried to access one of the trust funds, one she had never even known existed. She was flailing now, and in that flailing, she was exposing the true motive behind her retreat. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about taking quietly, strategically. She had underestimated how much of that I understood. At 8 to 12 a.m., I drove to the storage unit listed in her original text, the one she'd said contained my things. I'd never rented a storage space before. But I guessed the code was either something obvious or sentimental. It was our anniversary date. She hadn't even changed it. I opened the unit. 2 boxes, one with clothes, another with a few books, and my old laptop. That was it. No photo albums, no personal effects. Nothing from my late father, his fishing journal, his tools, the watch he gave me when I turned 30. gone like I'd been skimmed off the surface of my own life, clean, surgical, intentional. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but something shifted in me, something cold and weighty like a door closing. This wasn't just betrayal, this was erasure. She hadn't left me. She'd deleted me. I went to a cafe I used to frequent during my early days in Kingston before marriage, before Melissa. Before all the performance, I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, booted up the laptop. I checked the account logs. My systems had tracked 16 failed login attempts from Melissa's devices across 3 accounts overnight. She was still trying. Still reaching. I logged each one, time-stamped, and archived it. Ava called just before noon. "I've filed," she said. "Request for emergency asset protection divorce with cause under financial misconduct and fraud monitoring alert across all your marital assets." "What's the likelihood of approval?" I asked. "In Ontario, given your documentation, extremely high." She paused. "Melissa won't see this coming. Most people don't when they assume the quiet one isn't paying attention." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Good. Back at the condo, I packed a weekend bag and left the rest. I had no interest in reclaiming a space she'd already gutted emotionally and physically. I booked into a small rental cottage outside town, somewhere temporary, quiet. The kind of place where you could hear yourself think, and no one would ask why you looked like someone who'd lost everything, even if you hadn't. By 4:00 p.m., Melissa's lawyer had emailed Ava a request for immediate financial disclosure. The tone was aggressive, almost performative, vague accusations about irregularities in my practice, threats about going public. Ava laughed when she forwarded it to me. "This isn't a defense, it's theater," I replied with a single line, "Proceed as planned." That night, as I sat on the porch of the cottage and watched the sun melt into the lake, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. Not peace, not yet. But something close. I wasn't chasing resolution. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was executing a plan, and the plan was working. It was just past 8:00 a.m. when I typed the name Tyler Grant into the investigative database I'd licensed under my forensic firm. The air outside the cottage in Seeley's Bay was still misty, the early fall breeze drifting through the pine trees, but my focus was surgical. I wasn't looking for gossip or moral validation. I was after numbers, documents, paper trails, the things that don't lie when people do. I'd seen Tyler on Melissa's Instagram for months, always in the background, at retreats, gym events, or brunches, captioned with vague affirmations about growth and alignment. I'd never bothered to look too closely. He was just another face in the periphery, but now I needed to know exactly who Melissa believed was someone better. The results didn't take long. Tyler Grant, age 37, self-employed as owner and operator of Grant Fitness Studio located in Midtown Toronto. A sleek facility, from what I could see. New equipment, boutique workout rooms, LED-lit mirrors. On the surface, it screamed success. But just beneath that glossy layer, the numbers told a different story. His business was hemorrhaging. He had 3 open lines of credit, all near their limits. His operating account had bounced payments twice in the last 90 days. And most notably, a $175,000 equipment loan had been approved 4 months ago, secured by collateral. Melissa should have never had the right to leverage. I flagged the document and enlarged the digital signature fields. The signature beside Tyler's was Melissa's below. That in a smaller font, it read, "Joint marital assets declared for collateral assessment." That's when it hit me. She didn't just co-sign, she declared our marital financial profile as backing for the loan. And if the loan defaulted, which it clearly was about to, that responsibility could fall on me. I leaned back in the chair and stared out the window at the lake. The silence outside was deceptive. In the digital world, chaos had already started. Noah arrived an hour later, laptop in one hand, coffee in the other. You wanted to dig, he asked. Let's dig. We spread out across the kitchen table, pulling records from business registries, credit agencies, even public small business loan declarations. Tyler had opened the gym a year and a half ago with a personal savings contribution of just under $30,000. Since then, it had survived solely on external funding. Leasing agreements, a failed crowdfunding campaign, and increasingly desperate loans. Melissa's name was on at least 4 of them, either directly as a co-signer or indirectly through fund transfers from our joint accounts. Look at this. Noah said, flipping his screen toward me. She co-signed a commercial space rental lease term 5 years. And here's the kicker, she used your name under spousal consent for tenancy risk assessment. I didn't speak. I was used to reading betrayal in spreadsheets. But this wasn't just betrayal. It was impersonation. Quiet, calculated, and absolutely prosecutable. She knew exactly what she was doing. Noah said quietly, "This wasn't a whim, this was planned." I nodded, "And now we make sure it unravels just as precisely." By early afternoon, Ava called with confirmation. The emergency asset protection order had been granted. Any financial move tied to my name, either personally or through Melissa, was now locked pending divorce proceedings. That meant banks would start reevaluating loans. And for someone like Tyler, whose empire depended on financial illusions, that reevaluation would be catastrophic. I opened my email and drafted a new message, subject line notice of fraudulent collateral declaration. Urgent review requested. I attached the signed loan documents, highlighted the marital asset clause, and CC'd the bank's fraud compliance team. No threats, no accusations, just a request for clarity. I knew what would happen next. A compliance officer would review the documentation, flag inconsistencies, and initiate a full audit. The loan would be called in, equipment could be seized, insurance claims would stall, and the image Tyler projected, healthy, strong, thriving, would fracture under the weight of the truth. Still, something bothered me. It wasn't enough to pull strings behind the scenes. I needed Tyler to know. Not because I wanted to intimidate him, but because I needed him to understand what was coming and why I didn't believe in surprises when it came to accountability. I found the address for Grant Fitness and drove into the city the next day. It was exactly what I expected. Sleek signage, curated atmosphere, influencers in overpriced activewear posing between sets. Tyler was at the front, greeting members with a perfectly rehearsed smile, fitted t-shirt, hugging his gym-sculpted frame. When he saw me, his expression faltered slightly. I was older, quieter, but not uncertain. "You must be Graham," he said, extending a hand. "Melissa mentioned you. I didn't shake. We need to talk, privately." He led me to his office, glass-walled, soundproof, performatively minimalist. I placed a folder on his desk. "Everything in here connects you to Melissa's use of my marital assets, loans, leases, credit lines, some of which were signed with my name attached. Without my knowledge, that's called fraud." He blinked, visibly rattled. "These were arrangements between me and Melissa." I met his gaze based on financial backing that's now frozen, which means those loans will be called due. "Very soon," she said. "You were wealthy," he said, tone sharpening. "That money wasn't an issue." "Money's not the issue," I replied. "Consent is." I stood to leave but paused at the door. When Melissa moved out, she took more than money. She took things that mattered. Photos, heirlooms, things money can't replace. He hesitated. "I'll see what I can do. That's all I ask." That night, a courier dropped off a box at the cottage inside my father's watch. A few framed photos and the dog-eared journal he used to keep fishing records in. No note, no apology, just returned items quietly as they should be. I arrived at Grant Fitness Studio at precisely 10:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. I chose the time deliberately late enough that the early morning rush had cleared. early enough that the midday lull hadn't yet set in. The gym was everything I expected it to be: polished, glass curated playlists, and a scent of eucalyptus and ambition lingering in the air, the kind of place where clients took selfies more often than squats. Behind the reception desk stood a young man in branded athleisure, who barely looked old enough to vote. I gave my name and asked to speak to Tyler Grant. His eyes flickered with recognition, or perhaps unease. "Let me check if he's available." Tyler appeared moments later, all charm and performance, tight shirt, gleaming smile, the kind of tan that came from a salon. "Not the sun, Graham. What a surprise." "Melissa didn't say you'd be in town. She didn't know," I said evenly. "Can we speak somewhere private?" His smile flickered but held. Of course, he led me through the main floor, past rows of treadmills and free weights, into a glass-walled office tucked at the back. The room was sleek, matte black desk, minimalist decor, a single motivational quote on the wall. "Discomfort is growth in disguise." I didn't sit. I placed a thick folder on his desk, the same one I'd brought to our last encounter, but now updated, organized by category, color-coded by risk. "Everything in here," I began, "ties you and Melissa to a growing list of liabilities: credit cards, leases, vendor contracts. Most notably, a $175,000 equipment loan backed by marital assets you had no legal right to use." Tyler stayed standing, jaw tight. "Melissa told me you were conservative with money," I assumed. "You assumed wrong," I cut in, "and assumptions don't hold up in court." He opened the folder and flipped through the first few pages. I watched his eyes move, his throat tense. "Look," he said finally, voice trying to sound reasonable. I didn't know all the details. Melissa handled the financial side. "Then you're about to learn what those details cost." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The equipment you're using to train influencers and sell wellness packages. It's about to be repossessed. The lease you brag about in interviews. It was underwritten with signatures Melissa forged. And now that our accounts are frozen and the courts involved, every lender you've ever smiled at will be calling you this week." He exhaled sharply, trying to collect himself. "This feels personal." "It's not," I replied. "I'm not here because you took my wife. I'm here because you let her use my name to fund your fantasy." He didn't answer. I leaned in. "You may think this is just a relationship gone bad. It's not. It's a chain of financial misrepresentation, and in Canada that's not just civil, it's criminal." I turned to leave but stopped at the door. "One more thing. When Melissa left, she took some of my personal items, things with no monetary value but meaning. I got some of them back. Thanks to you. For that, I'm acknowledging this visit happened before I file a formal complaint, but don't misunderstand that as leniency. It's just sequencing." His mask slipped for a moment. No smile, no posture, just stillness. "Do you think I'll go to jail?" he asked quietly. "That's not up to me," I said. "But I can promise this: whatever's coming, you're not prepared for it." I walked out past the same receptionist, through the artificial calm of scented air and curated playlists, and into the sunlight outside. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was exactness, like a scale balancing itself 1 quiet gram at a time. That evening, Ava called. I just got off the phone with the compliance division at Axis Credit. "The equipment loan is being reviewed. The fraud department is involved. You were right to get in front of it." "How long before they act?" I asked. "Could be days, could be hours. But they'll seize assets if Tyler can't refinance without your backing, which he can't." "Exactly." I hung up and sat out on the porch of the cottage. The trees were just beginning to turn the tips of maples burning red above the lake. I thought about how fragile empires are when they're built on borrowed identities. Tyler had constructed a brand on confidence, image, and charisma, But none of those pay invoices and Melissa. She'd built a life on someone else's stability. She never believed I'd confront her. Never imagined I'd track every click, every dollar, every forgery. But she'd forgotten what I was trained to do. Detect anomalies, follow patterns, and act before the fall. It was just after 10 a.m. when I stepped into the office of Ava Choi on the 21st floor of a law firm overlooking downtown Toronto. The skyline behind her was crisp CN Tower framed like punctuation at the edge of the city's ambition. Her office, by contrast, was all muted tones and strategic quiet. No clutter, just case files and control. Ava looked up from her screen as I entered, sliding a thick folder across the desk. The bank responded. She said, tapping the top, "We've got movement." I took a seat and opened the file. Inside were copies of 4 loan documents, 3 business, 1 personal each, bearing Melissa's signature as co-signer, and each listing my name or marital status in the liability clause. "These are the ones we already knew about," I said. "And one we didn't." Ava added, flipping to the last page. It was a lease agreement for a new commercial space signed 6 weeks ago. Melissa's signature, bold mine, forged just below it. "She used your legal name to declare joint marital backing without disclosure," Ava said. "That's textbook misrepresentation, and in Ontario it qualifies as fraud." I didn't speak. Just let the weight of it settle like dust on the polished desk. I wasn't surprised anymore. The emotional charge had burned itself out 2 chapters ago. What was left now was clean and cold. What I did best: follow the numbers, build the case. "I want the emergency asset protection filed today," I said. "Full scope." Ava nodded. "Already done. We've submitted to the Superior Court with a motion to freeze all jointly held assets until divorce terms are finalized. Based on what you've provided, they'll grant it." The signatures alone are enough. We moved on to the divorce filing. Melissa Bowman, Ellison versus Graham Ellison, citing financial misconduct, marital fraud, and intentional concealment of joint funds. The goal, Ava said calmly, isn't revenge. It's protection. We're not here to embarrass her. We're here to ensure she doesn't dismantle what took you decades to build. I appreciated that. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about structure. About taking back control over what was mine quietly, permanently. By early afternoon, Melissa's lawyer had responded an aggressive email demanding immediate access to all financial documentation. Graham may be concealing, coupled with veiled threats about unethical financial practices in my accounting business. Ava arched a brow as she read it. "This is desperation." "It's projection," I replied. "And it's not going to work." While she prepared the formal reply, I reviewed transaction logs from the past year. There were dozens of them. $900 here, $2,400 there, always small enough to fly under radar, always spaced just enough apart to look routine. But when laid side by side, they painted a clear picture. Melissa had been siphoning funds for over a year, building her exit strategy with my earnings. "How do you want to proceed?" Ava asked. "Do we go public with the fraud claims?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let the banks move first. Let it come from them, not me." I left the office and walked for a while through Queen's Park, letting the cool breeze push through the city noise. Everything around me moved in fast, impulsive rhythms, cars, people, phones buzzing with the urgency of lives curated for performance. And yet I felt still. I wasn't chasing. I wasn't trying to explain or argue. I was building pressure in a system she didn't even know existed. And soon it would release. Later that evening, back at the cottage, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Melissa. It was my mortgage officer at Laurentian Bank, Mr. Ellison. He said, his voice neutral but tense. "We've received a compliance flag on a home equity application filed under your name. We need to confirm whether this was authorized. I closed my eyes. It wasn't. I'll send documentation to that effect within the hour. Understood? In that case, the application will be frozen and your credit profile protected. Another attempt. Another failure. She was still trying to pull from the system I'd locked tight. Melissa hadn't realized yet that the game she was playing no longer had rules she could manipulate. I wrote the email attached, the affidavit, and hit send. At 11:47 p.m., I received a final message from her number. "You're being petty. I thought you were better than this." I didn't respond. Instead, I archived the message, attached it to the legal communication log, and set my phone face down. There was nothing petty about protecting what's yours, especially when the person taking from you expects you to stay quiet. It was exactly 8:03 a.m. when my phone rang. I just stepped outside onto the back deck of the cottage with a cup of black coffee, the autumn air crisp against my skin. The lake below shimmered in stillness, an illusion of calm, much like the one Melissa had carefully crafted over the years. Her name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail again, but something told me this wasn't another plea or accusation. It was something else. I answered. "What have you done?" she said. Her voice tight, controlled only on the surface. The bank froze everything. "They're calling in the loans. They're seizing equipment from the gym today." I said nothing for a moment. "Let the weight of that land. That sounds unfortunate," I said, finally calm as the lake in front of me. "This is vindictive," she snapped. "You're trying to destroy him just to get back at me. I thought you were better than that." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'm not doing anything to him," I replied. "I'm protecting myself from fraud. You used our marriage to secure his loans without my consent. That's illegal, Melissa, not unkind." "Illegal." There was a pause. Long, heavy, then her voice softened. "Look, maybe we rushed things. Maybe we didn't think it through. But you don't have to go through with this. Come home. We can talk." And there it was. Her old tone, the one she used when she wanted me to absorb the discomfort. Take the hit, make things go away quietly. But this time I didn't. "There's nothing to talk about." I said, "The divorce will proceed. The fraud investigation will continue. And Tyler will learn the difference between building a business and borrowing someone else's life to fake one." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, as I stepped into the cottage after a walk along the shoreline, I noticed the alert light blinking on my laptop. Ava had sent an update, subject line "Asset Protection Order," enforced attached. Were court documents confirming the freeze of all jointly held accounts, assets, and property transactions. Every credit card Melissa had access to had been deactivated. Any property still bearing my name, including the condo in Kingston, was now off limits for use, sale, or leverage. An hour later, Melissa's lawyer called Ava in a fury, demanded to know why his client was financially paralyzed. Ava responded the way only Ava could, "Because your client built a house of cards using someone else's foundation, and that foundation no longer agrees to support it." She forwarded me the transcript. I read it twice, then closed the email. Around midnight, another message came in from Melissa. This time, not a call, not a text, an email. Long, rambling, defensive. "You're turning this into something cruel. I never meant to hurt you. I just needed something more. Tyler needed me. I didn't think it would come to this." I read it slowly, once, then archived it. No reply, and the next morning I received a courier envelope at the cottage. Inside were papers requesting voluntary mediation, a desperate attempt to regain control over the narrative before it unraveled fully in court. Attached was a post-it note in Melissa's handwriting. "Please for what we had." I set the envelope aside and finished my breakfast. Later that afternoon, Ava called with the real update I'd been waiting for. We have a forensic trail, she said. Melissa's been moving money into personal and business accounts tied to Tyler for over a year, small transfers, inconsistent patterns. But they add up to just under $80,000. I nodded. So we can formally add financial infidelity to the filing. Absolutely. And more importantly, the banks can treat her participation as intentional misrepresentation, which means they'll pursue her directly. Exactly. I looked out the window again. Clouds were gathering over the lake, the wind picking up slightly across the water. Everything was moving, but silently. Exactly how I liked it, I spent the rest of the evening reorganizing files, preparing for mediation, not as a negotiation, but as a presentation of facts. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to justify. I would walk in with everything laid out in precise order, like a ledger finally reconciled. At 10:21 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was a name I didn't expect, Tyler Grant. The message was short: you need to back off. Melissa deserves better than this. Don't make it uglier than it already is. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I saved the number, logged the message, and filed it into the legal archive folder. I didn't reply. Some people think silence is weakness. They don't realize that silence can be the sound of something very heavy being placed exactly where it needs to go. The mediation hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 9:00 a.m. sharp, inside a boardroom overlooking the Bay Street Financial District. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal suit, no tie, precise, clean, unshakable. Ava was already there, flipping through documents like she was conducting a symphony, each tab, an exhibit numbered, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. "They're here," she said. Without looking up, "Let's begin." Melissa walked in first. She was still beautiful, still poised, but the cracks were showing. The tightness around her eyes, the rigid smile that didn't quite reach, her makeup was perfect, but it couldn't hide the fatigue. Next to her was her lawyer, a younger man in a navy suit, who looked more like a real estate agent than a litigator. He had a thick binder in one hand and a Starbucks in the other. Ava didn't even stand. "Let's talk," she said, motioning toward the table. The mediator, a calm woman in her 50s with the neutral tone of someone who'd seen too many divorces turn nuclear, asked for opening positions. Melissa's lawyer spoke first. "My client is open to a reasonable division of assets," he said. "Despite the aggressive tactics Mr. Ellison has employed thus far, we believe a fair settlement can be reached." Ava gave him a polite smile. "We agree. That's why we brought this." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the findings from the forensic audit Ava's team had completed the week before. Bank records, credit card authorizations, co-signed lease agreements, loan applications bearing forged signatures, and the clincher, a full financial trail proving that Melissa had siphoned nearly $80,000 from joint accounts over a 14-month period to support Tyler's business. Her lawyer's smile froze. He flipped through the pages, then looked at Melissa. Her face went pale. "We'll need time to review this," he muttered. "Of course." Ava said, her voice cool, "But you should know the bank has already referred the matter to the Ontario Crown Prosecutor. Loan fraud is not a private issue. It's criminal." Melissa turned to me then. Her eyes were wide. Not with rage, but with disbelief, like she still couldn't quite understand how things had slipped so far out of her control. "Criminal charges," she whispered. "Graham, please, this can't be happening." "I didn't file the charges," I replied calmly. "The banks did. That's what happens when you forge loan documents and back them with someone else's assets." Her lawyer leaned over to whisper in her ear, and she shook her head violently. No, I won't go to jail. I didn't mean—" Ava interrupted, unfazed. "We're prepared to offer a statement to the bank that may mitigate criminal exposure if Ms. Ellison agrees to our proposed settlement today." She opened a separate folder. She keeps her yoga studio. She keeps her car. No spousal support. And she assumes full liability for any business debts incurred in her name or co-signed during the marriage. Melissa's mouth parted, stunned. No alimony, you emptied our accounts while on vacation with someone else. I said, without emotion. Alimony isn't an option, it's an insult. There was a long silence. Then slowly, silently, she reached for the pen and signed. By 11:42 a.m., the deal was done. Tyler, of course, was another story. The following Monday, Ava sent me a screenshot from a news alert: Grant Fitness Studio temporarily closed amid repossession of equipment by lender beneath. It was a blurry photo of Tyler standing outside the gym phone to his ear, frustration carved into every line of his face. I didn't feel vindicated, just confirmed. Like watching a fire you didn't start finally burn out. Melissa tried once more, one last attempt at rewriting the ending. She caught me in the hallway outside the mediation room as I was leaving. I never thought you'd fight back like this, she said. Her voice was quieter now. No spin, no seduction, just reality. You always just went along with everything. I looked at her for a long moment. That was my choice, I said. Just like this was yours. And I walked away. Back at the cottage that evening, I poured a glass of bourbon and stood at the window. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the soft steadiness of something inevitable. The kind of movement that doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. I thought about how Melissa had once said, I was too cautious, too boring, too methodical. She was right, in a way. I wasn't reckless. I didn't chase drama, but I was prepared. And preparation is the slowest, quietest kind of power. A month after the mediation, I moved into a small craftsman-style house on the edge of Wolfe Island. Nothing extravagant, just a one-story structure with cedar siding, clean lines, and a wraparound porch overlooking the lake. The kind of place where the silence wasn't empty. It was earned. I bought it in cash through one of my holding companies, without telling anyone but Noah. No more shared spaces. No more keys handed out without caution. Just this, a place of my own, untouched by performance, untouched by Melissa. The first few days were spent assembling shelves, installing blinds, and learning the rhythm of the island ferry schedule. I cooked my meals, unpacked boxes, and sorted through a decade of belongings. Some returned, some recollected, and others quietly left behind. I didn't miss the condo. I didn't miss the curated furniture, the designer lighting, or the constant undercurrent of trying to impress someone who never truly understood what it cost to build a life from decimals and diligence. One Saturday morning, Jason, an old friend from my University of Ottawa days, came by to help me install cabinet handles in the kitchen. We hadn't seen each other in years, but when I called, he answered like no time had passed. That's how you know someone's real. They show up when the noise ends. He looked around, taking in the space with an approving nod. You really did it, he said. Cut clean and rebuilt. I didn't rebuild, I replied. I just cleared the wreckage. We worked in comfortable silence, the kind only old friends can maintain without awkwardness. He passed me a drill, held a hinge steady, and asked, You hear anything from her? No, I said, tightening the last screw, and I don't expect to. You could have taken her for everything he said, gone after full restitution. The fraud charges alone. I shook my head. She's not my problem anymore. That evening after Jason left, I sat on the porch with a tumbler of rye and watched the lake darken under a sky full of copper and steel. The loons called from somewhere across the water. A distant canoe left gentle ripples under the fading light. Peace doesn't come all at once. It arrives in moments, quiet, scattered, and honest. You learn to notice them, and then you start stringing them together. I thought about the last 15 years, How I'd allowed a shared life to drift so far off course without dropping anchor. How I'd seen the signs, logged the patterns, even built systems to protect myself, yet still hesitated until the damage was done. But maybe that's the thing about people like me. We don't act out of emotion, we act out of verification. Once we're sure we move, and when we move, it's permanent. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Melissa had relocated to Kelowna, British Columbia, rebranded her life as a mindful movement consultant, and started over with vague, inspirational quotes and filtered mountain views. No mention of the studio she lost. No mention of Tyler, whose gym had been absorbed by a national chain after repossession. He'd apparently moved to Miami, still chasing a lifestyle he couldn't afford on charm alone. They didn't talk about what happened. People rarely do when they lose by their own hand. I logged into my client portal that night and drafted a simple notice to my office manager. Taking 3 additional weeks off. Do not contact unless critical. I trust you. Run the ship. Then I powered down the laptop and set it aside. The next morning, I packed a duffel bag, filled the truck's tank, and headed north. No itinerary, no checklists, just the idea of open roads and clean air. I passed through small towns with names I couldn't remember, stopped at diners with chipped mugs and kind waitresses, and slept in roadside inns that smelled faintly of pine and old newspapers I fished. I read I Let Silence Have Me Completely somewhere near Algonquin. I found a cabin that reminded me of my father's, a modest A-frame tucked beside a stream with a fire pit out front, and just enough room to think. Without being lonely, I stayed there 3 days. Chopped wood, wrote nothing, spoke to no one. On the 3rd night, I lit a fire, sat back in a creaky Adirondack chair, and whispered to no one in particular. You made it. I didn't feel victorious. That would have required a war, and I hadn't gone to war. I'd simply removed myself from someone else's chaos and let the consequences catch up on their own. What I felt was something quieter. Like freedom, like finality, like myself, unmistakably, completely myself again. In life, victory doesn't always come with noise. It doesn't always require confrontation or raised voices. Sometimes true strength reveals itself in the quiet choices, the ones made with calm conviction, not out of spite but out of principle. Graham Ellison's story is not just about the end of a marriage built on betrayal. It's a powerful reminder of a deeper truth many older adults already understand. Stillness is not weakness, it's wisdom. Graham didn't shout, accuse, or seek revenge for show. He prepared, he acted with clarity. When the foundation of his life cracked, he didn't crumble, he adjusted. He followed the facts, relied on the law, and refused to let someone else's chaos define him. Instead of reacting with emotion, he responded with structure. His victory wasn't in what he took back, but in what he refused to lose his self-respect. The lesson here is simple but profound, especially for those of us who've lived through life's turns and trials. Never give up who you are, just to hold on to something that no longer deserves you. Protect yourself quietly, stand firm in what you know is right. And when the moment calls for it, walk away, not with bitterness, but with dignity intact. If this story resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a 1 in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more thoughtful, quietly powerful stories like this one, feel free to subscribe to the channel. No pressure, just when you're ready.